Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our last webinar event of the year for 2021. Very exciting. It's been a wild and crazy ride. We've covered a lot of technology over the year. We've seen a lot of things happen that we've anticipated. We've seen a lot of things happen that we didn't anticipate. So we thought it would be kind of fun to look back across the course of the year and see what were the things that we thought were going to be standout technologies at the beginning of the year and how did they stack up. So a little bit about us. Synergy Technical was founded in 2011 in Richmond, Virginia. We have offices all over the East Coast and staff members sitting all over the world. We're supporting over 3 million cloud users of Office and EMS and the Microsoft stack. We focus on productivity and security solutions. And a couple of years ago, actually, no, still last year, man, time is wild. What does time even mean anymore? Last year, we went out to San Francisco to accept the Microsoft 2020 M365 Security Deployment Partner of the Year award. And a large part of that was built on successes that we've seen in doing security and productivity immersion experiences all around the United States. Including several sessions in person back at Ignite when those were in-person events. And we sure are hopeful that 2022 will start to see a resumption of those in-person events. I cannot wait to start traveling again and come bring the joy of security and compliance and productivity to an office near you. I am so excited, man. So again, we're talking about a post-gnostication, but we actually started off the year by doing a security prognostication, both a blog and a webinar. And we kicked off the year with a set of predictions about what major technologies we thought would dominate our brain space as we planned to emerge from lockdown. This was based on a combination of 2020 security engagements, questions from customers, trends available in the marketplace, and just good old-fashioned hunches. And I predicted that we would kind of see things aligned to 5 major technology spaces. I thought these would be the main foci of 2021. And while interest across these areas remained generally high throughout the year, some delivered in ways that we simply did not predict, while others got pushed back. And we had the benefit of receiving the Microsoft Annual Threat Defense Report in October of this year, which helped fill in a lot of the gaps and understand a lot more context around twins that we thought anecdotally we were seeing. And so it seemed like, again, this would be a great opportunity to go back and look through our initial predictions and see what landed, what didn't, where we were just wrong. What were the things that we actually missed? Kind of my favorite first glance data point on this slide right here, and this is a lot, right? We're not going to go through and pick apart the entire defense report. It's 134 pages. It's publicly available. I strongly recommend you go down and download it and at least skim through it. There's a lot of fantastic content in it. But for anybody who might have been at some of our Ignite sessions in 2019, you may recall that we were presenting to the fact that Microsoft was processing 8 trillion security signals daily. And that seemed like a ridiculous number because at the time, as I was remarking, that meant that there were more than 1,000 security signals every day for every human being on the planet. That number has tripled, and we're still able to get meaningful results out of this. So we've seen not just a huge increase in the amount of security signals, but we've actually necessarily had to be able to scale up our operations to be able to process that and to take meaningful actions as a result of it. So the first one that we saw as being a huge mover in the space was going to be sensitivity labeling and data encryption. Now, I will go back and just read what I said I was going to do, what I saw as being a big focus in 2021. I said, folks are taking corporate data home and accessing our secrets in ways we never envisioned. Relying on VPN and email security isn't useful once the data has been copied off the corporate network. With AIP, we can establish persistent protections on files, provide simple sensitivity labels for our users to classify documents, enable auto classification with no additional licensing requirements, because that used to be a thing, right? You used to have to go up to a different licensing level, and now even apply sensitivity to whole Teams channels, and SharePoint libraries through actually being able to leverage sensitivity labels on Azure Active Directory groups. Now, this is one of the few places we actually have data to quantify how this has happened and how this has changed over the years. And this slide right here is actually pulled largely from the threat defense report. And now Microsoft's own documentation on their pages around their documentation, around Azure Information Protection shows this same kind of data. We need to be able to know what our data is, apply governance controls around it, protect it, and then control what happens to it wherever it may be. And I have seen a fair amount of growth in this space. I spoke to it in 2018 and 2019 as being a developing technology. We heard some pushback over those years that Microsoft wasn't doing enough to support third-party software or applications, and there still has been a little bit of a trick adopting this on a global level. Now, I probably didn't help things along as I was talking about the way to best implement these controls, because I have long been in the let's rip off the bandage, big bang, let's just knock it out. Users are going to have to just adapt and roll with it. That puts some burden on the users to learn a lot in a short amount of time, and necessarily it means that IT has a long uphill battle to face in order to get these solutions implemented. Pre-implementation was the golden ticket with this. You'd have to do a lot of assessment, a lot of understanding what your data is, where your data is, how your users work with that data, how to identify data strings, and do a lot of training and deliver a lot of one sheets. And once you went through into production, you did not want to make a lot of changes to this space, because this was an area where I viewed that once you taught the users which button to click, you did not want to go back and teach them again or ask them to change that behavior. I've softened a little bit on that, and I'm starting to recognize that this needs to be much more of a crawl, walk, run approach, at least in terms of implementing AIP. There are a lot of technologies that work very well with implementing in a big bang. It turns out this one's a little bit more nuanced, and my apologies if I've led you astray over the years. But what we're recognizing from interactions with our own customers and from watching trends in the marketplace is that what we need to do first, yes, identify our data locations and labeling requirements. Actually, a lot of companies already have this documented in a written down, printed out document that tells you, where to put the watermarks and how big and what color they even need to be, right? We need to define initial label groups or initial labels and policies, but we need to do very, very, very small and limited engagement, gather lots of feedback, expand that to larger groups, gather their feedback, do some training, loop back to the beginning as necessary, and then we want to roll this out into production in groups. So the nice thing is that with the way that label policies work, there's actually a natural mechanism for that. So I'm recognizing that this is no longer a rip the Band-Aid off approach, that we need to actually be able to roll users into this environment. And I'm bummed because I have a slide that actually shows the adoption rate over or around AIP labeling, and I may have put it in the wrong place in here. But what we actually can see from the Microsoft Threat Defense Report is that prior to 2020, we had about 20 million active monthly users in Azure Information Protection, and that number has come up to closer to 38 million, with a small dip around the holidays last year. But we have seen a substantial improvement. And actually, this is really cool because this means we can actually directly quantify the growth of this space. So in the period that we have been working from home, we have seen an almost twofold increase in the use of Azure Information Protection. We do still see that this is going to continue to be a little bit more of a bell curve because users are still working from home. They are still taking our data out of our protected enclaves and working with it in ways that we need to make sure that we can understand and control. So the next part was endpoint detection and response. And I said at the beginning of the year, Defender for Endpoint can now report on the highest sensitivity label that's been detected on a given machine. So again, tying in the sensitivity labels, right? And help us understand the true severity of an attack. Defender for Endpoint now also supports Mac, Android, Linux, and pretty much any other OS you want to throw at it, while also enabling web content filtering. Okay. So we saw huge growth in this space through 2021, and with good reason. Microsoft continued to make huge commitments to closing feature gaps between supported endpoints, bringing Linux, macOS, iOS, and Windows capabilities. So we can now actually monitor for servers. We can monitor for servers in the same incident with other workstations. We get threat and vulnerability management pretty much across the board. We have huge increases in the capabilities of in Defender for Endpoint. And what we can actually see here is that this continues to be a very important and critical aspect of our abilities to protect our systems, because we don't have to go looking back very far to see when the number of ransomware encounter rates was below 60 million, and we peaked over 100 million encounters this year. So we absolutely desperately need to be focused on endpoint protections in our environments. Now, what we did not see happening this year was the introduction of a split in the licensing level. This had been a request for a long time, but to be honest, I didn't actually see how Microsoft was going to solve the gap or solve the challenge of the traditional separation between a P1 and a P2 product. And if you followed me over any period of time at all, you'll know that when I speak to E3 versus E5 or P1 versus P2, in all cases, the P1/E3 version delivers the security workload. The E5 or P2 version layers on analytics, behavioral analysis, automated incident response, all the high intelligence stuff that you would need to be able to do to let the system manage it, to turn on the automations. That division was really tricky with the Defender for Endpoint, because kind of the whole purpose of it was EDR, right? So where do you draw that line? Well, I'm actually pretty impressed at where they've done this. And the ability to do this and to deliver a P1 version of it means that we can now actually deliver a lot of the same security capabilities all the way down from the big dog E5 whatever M365 through our business premium customers. And this P1 capability is now a part of the Microsoft 365 E3 stack, which is a huge improvement. So again, I didn't actually see this happening this year. We'd heard a lot of feedback from customers asking for it to happen sometime soon, but I really thought it was going to be a 2022 result. But I'm so excited that it's there. And we actually also got some additional improvements in the EDR space, right? So it got a lot smarter this year with the incident and threat analytics integration with Defender for Office, which now allows us to track our threats from the initial blocked emails straight through to the compromised mailboxes, to compromised systems, and then see lateral movement across systems. Now, we've had some of that visibility before, but what we got, like I said, was that if you look in the threat analytics space and you look at how this particular targeted attack is happening, you used to actually have to go look at that in two separate locations. Now it's all unified, and that is fantastic. We also got, and I buried the lead on this a little bit, we got a lot more development around web content filtering, right? It's been a long missing component in the Microsoft stack. It's actually one that Microsoft hasn't directly serviced since the discontinuation of ISA Server years ago. Microsoft initially offered web content filtering as a bolt-on third-party component in Defender for Endpoint in summer of 2019 with a product called Siren that turned out to be a little bit too cumbersome to figure out how to license and activate and run in conjunction. So Microsoft bought it, and they've made it simply a component of Defender for Endpoint. And we are actually seeing a huge amount of uptick in interest in this one capability alone. This is one where you're going to have categorized filtering, but it can also consume specific what you can consider as specific indicators of compromise if you want to block an additional explicit URL. So this has been really big space, and now the ability to actually carve up the categories and apply them specifically to different scopes of machines in your environment gives you a lot more flexibility and control than what we have seen in the past. But we also got huge improvements to the threat and vulnerability management dashboard, right? Prior to 2021, this was principally just Windows. Well, now we've got capabilities to monitor against iOS, Android, Mac OS, all the fun stuff, right? So this has really grown a huge amount. And we're really excited to see where this is going to go as we continue to move into 2022. The next space where we saw a ton of interest in 2020 and necessarily thought we were going to see a large amount of increase in interest and adoption in 2021 was SIEM and SOAR capabilities. So I said Microsoft may have been late to the party with a SIEM, but they showed up with chips and brought friends. With zero infrastructure, free ingestion of Office 365 data, and incredibly low data retention costs, Sentinel is becoming the go-to solution to get up and running with almost instantaneous results. If you're trying to drive toward compliance and you need to keep audit logs more than 30 days, Sentinel is your ticket. And this remains absolutely true. We have fielded so much interest around Sentinel. I would say that between that and EDR, those are probably the two biggest technologies we have been requested to support, implement, control, manage, set up, whatever you want to call it, throughout the entire year of 2021. Last year, it was all about how do I get started with Sentinel. This year, it has been more of how do I performance tune Sentinel. And that, for me, is usually the indication when a technology has gone beyond a niche and is starting to become a core function of our SOC team. How do we performance tune it? So Sentinel itself gained some capabilities throughout the year, but we did see a massive amount of adoption. Like I said, we saw a lot of performance tuning, and a lot of that had to do with making sure that we weren't over-consuming and driving up costs with retention or storage, and log analytics. We can actually make it so that it consumes everything, and then machines cost a lot of money to support, right? But there's also optimizing to zero, which we've discussed in other videos, where we don't get a whole lot of security benefit out of it. So we've done a lot of work to help customers figure out what is the right amount of data for the right workloads to ensure they get the right results and meaningful security analytics out of it. But I don't actually have metrics on this one. So this one is more of a gut feel, but on the Azure Information Protection, we actually explicitly have metrics on the number of users that have adopted it over the year. But I did mention it's gained some new tricks. In the earlier days of Sentinel, right, we had the ability to add data connectors, and a data connector could be tied to one of 100+ things that could be all the way down from just basic syslog integration to full stack integration with Microsoft 365. Well, we also got the ability to create, or actually to subscribe to or activate, if you will, or install these Content Hub offerings. This basically allows you to do one-stop shopping for enabling monitoring of a tool set, whether it's a physical device or an application or a web app, however you want to look at it, whatever the product is that has been delivered into this space. It's going to pre-configure your analytics rules, your hunting queries, playbooks, whatever it is that's associated with this, and you just install it. You just install it, and you don't have to go through finding the right, watch lists you don't have to go through finding the right components to add to your workbooks and notebooks, all that fun stuff. It just pre-packages it for you. That's made it a lot easier to get up and started with a lot of the more advanced integrations. And you might see right underneath Content Hub is repositories where you can actually add content to your GitHub and make that part of what gets consumed into your Content Hub. So there's a lot of great capabilities for managing how we extend Sentinel into additional spaces. Microsoft has also enabled what used to have to be done third-party or manually, where you could actually have automatic incident closing in some of the other Microsoft workspaces. So like you used to be when you had a cloud app security or Defender for cloud apps, if that generated an alert, yes, it would report into Sentinel, but you still had to go and do something manually to close it. Well, now we've got those integrations going in both directions. So we have a lot more orchestration and automation that's enabled through Sentinel. And we continue to see this as being a rising star in terms of the adoption rates through 2022. I'm really excited about that. Then we get to remote provisioning. And this is one that while we saw it coming, we did not see the way it would come. So none of us got to send users home for quarantine at a convenient point in their device life cycles. And one issue I've heard consistently over the past year has been the cost of deploying technology to a remote workforce. Endpoint Manager Autopilot's capabilities can fill this gap for zero-touch provisioning. I see a bunch of projects coming from organizations that are struggling to replace aging equipment, and also a lot from companies that are recognizing the value of hiring out-of-area talent that want to eliminate on-premises imaging and shipping of new devices. Yes, well, we did see that. And what we saw happening was this, and this is actually directly stolen from Microsoft's documentation. we foresaw that Autopilot would get a huge injection of capabilities, and users would go crazy for Autopilot, and they would Autopilot the everything, right? We saw more vendors getting enrolled into Autopilot programs, so you could direct ship from more than just one or two. I think the last time I checked the list, it had 10 or more vendors in it, OEMs, that could directly tie your IMEIs of your devices right to your business store in Microsoft. Users would be able to pull the machine out, get up and running, and have a full managed experience right there within your environment. And to be sure, that is still very much a valid way that users can receive new equipment. We can create several Autopilot deployment profiles. They do synchronize to our Microsoft Store for Business. We can absolutely continue to service this way, and we do see a lot of customers that have significant investments in Autopilot. We also have the ability to deliver virtual desktops, and this has grown so much over the last 2.5 years. When I went to Redmond in May of 2019 and saw an alpha version of Azure Virtual Desktop, back before it was even called Windows Virtual Desktop, I saw this as a potential VDI solution, but it had a lot of challenges then. The management of it was very tricky, and there was a lot of choices that were made for you. In early 2020, all of the management got re-architected. The entire solution went through a V2 makeover right as I was going through all the training for the V1 model. And then actually we saw another full revolution in terms of its capabilities and infrastructure and monitoring and deployment requirements happen kind of this year, a little bit in stages. It wasn't like an overnight big bang revolution, but it did happen. But it still has a lot of architectural components, and you are still very much in the business of managing a lot of resources to get Azure Virtual Desktop up and running. I'm not saying it's a bad solution. It's actually a pretty cool solution, and it was certainly Microsoft's first foray into fully personalized, persistent machines that you could run in Azure, and have users get into them and have their full desktop experience. But it's also kind of expensive, right? And it's expensive in ways that we can solve with things like reserved instances. But when we start applying those optimizations around, say, reserved instances, we don't serve our seasonal workers super great. Or maybe we go to auto shutdown options and we say that machines are off over the weekend. They're only up 8 to 6 p.m. Maybe we can even tailor your vacation schedule to shut them down to reduce those consumption, because we're paying for consumption in Azure Virtual Desktop. We're running VMs in Azure. But when we do that, well, then we lose that user persistence that we look forward to, right? So if a user kicks off a process at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they cannot assume that they're going to come in tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and it's going to have finished, right? Because we've auto shut the machine down. So when we look at Azure Virtual Desktop as a VDI solution, it has some great capabilities, but it also has some limitations. So we were gobsmacked, quite frankly, blown away when we started seeing that this was going to be a thing. Windows 365. I actually heard about this when a customer asked me what was coming, and I got to admit, it took me completely by surprise. This was going to be fully managed, running in actually Microsoft's data centers with fixed cost per month. Utilization doesn't matter, right? So you could run it at 0% memory and processor, or you could run it at 100% memory and processor the whole time. Who cares? You're not paying for consumption. You don't have to park the machines. You don't have to do reserved instances. It is pre-optimized for you. And I guarantee you, you cannot run these machine sizes directly in AVD for the kind of cost that you can run them, delivering a persistent personal user experience that is scalable, that works for your users. I mean, I would be really excited and curious to see if anybody has figured out a way to do this for personal workstation in AVD for the kind of cost that we can actually see in Windows 365. It's absolutely phenomenal. And I, unfortunately, was on vacation the week that Windows 365 first dropped, and I missed my opportunity to get my my trial licensing, so I was very disappointed. But we were able to actually get that set up, and then I was able to produce some video content around being able to access the same Windows 365 persistent experience across a range of machines. Some folks may have seen that video. It's got 7,200 views on YouTube right now, but we went across multiple devices from multiple vendors, including a Chromebook that's sitting there with its screen off in that image. We were able to access it from my mobile phone, right? And so we're actually able to get in with Windows 365 and show that we can launch the same RD client access application on a mobile device. It actually will auto rotate. And while it is small, it's absolutely usable. And actually, I can take this phone when it's turned this way, plug it into an external USB-C source or external USB-C monitor and keyboard and use it like it's an actual full-fledged Windows PC. It totally accepts most of my peripherals, right? There are some limitations, and we covered those in that same video. But Windows 365 was quite the unexpected surprise. And I wish I could get you numbers on that. But again, in the first week of its existence, they exceeded their capacity and had to shut down the trials. It has continued to grow at leaps and bounds. We are seeing huge amounts of adoption, huge amounts of interest. It's phenomenal, the speed at which this product is taking off and what it's enabling organizations to do without any of the complex infrastructure requirements and without having to do any of the complex cost optimization capabilities for Azure Virtual Desktop. If you have not looked into Windows 365 and you're looking at an aging fleet of devices, truly, it is absolutely worth your time to go out and look at that. So the last main point that we put in that content for at the beginning of the year was Endpoint DLP. And I gotta say, this one blew me away too. All right, so I said at the time, this is the question I probably heard the most in 2020. And while there was a solution, it wasn't one you could monitor. So really, it was actually happening at the endpoint, being monitored by the endpoint. There was no visible reporting. It's all well and good, or good and well, to say you have DLP on endpoints and within apps, but do you really? If you can't monitor it, do you have it? You may have seen me demo the little briefcase that Windows Information Protection enables on corporate apps and websites, but that technology is all client-based. Now we have a cloud-side implementation of that same functionality. And we do, and it's pretty cool. And it's actually just integrated into the existing data loss prevention capabilities that are already sitting out there in our compliance.microsoft.com space. When we go to the DLP space, we actually have a new tab that says Endpoint DLP settings. And if we go into that, we're actually able to go in and define how we should be managing our devices for Endpoint DLP. And the first thing that we should absolutely always do is turn on the always audit file activities for devices. But in order to do that, we actually have to get them enrolled. And I'll cover that in a second. But now we have integrated into creating our DLP policies, right? We've had Exchange email, we've had SharePoint sites, we've had OneDrive accounts, we got Teams chats and channel messages pretty recently. We got on-premises repositories a year or two ago, but now we can actually do it straight up right in here at devices. And this is user and group based, right? So we're going to be monitoring or be auditing this and setting up our controls to either all or going in by users. Now, I did mention that we have to onboard these things. And while I initially thought that this was actually going to be the same package that onboards things into Endpoint DLP, it turns out that yes, but no. The experience looks very similar, but it is actually not the same thing. And once I have my machines onboarded and ingested and controlled by an Endpoint DLP, or sorry, Defender for Endpoint, let me get that backward, then I can simply turn it on in this environment. And we can see right down through the list here that I have a bunch of machines in here. You can see that it knows that there's a Windows Server 2019 device in here, but it's not a supported operating system for this technology. So now that I've got my machines in here, if I go back into my data classification of my Content Explorer, my Activity Explorer, things will be surfacing up from there. I don't have anything to show you in that space because my environment is comically small and there are not real live human beings in that space. So those were the 5 main things that we saw happening throughout the course of the year. But my question is, what did we miss? From a security perspective, obviously, there were a couple of massive global incidents that happened this year. The first of them was Print Nightmare, right? We saw so much activity around Print Nightmare. And you may recall that at the beginning of the year, we actually did a webinar and a series of blog posts around universal print. What we did not anticipate is that universal print was never susceptible to the challenges that were posed through Print Nightmare. Does that mean that universal print suddenly becomes a security technology, or is it a productivity technology? Time will tell with that, so I didn't put it on the list here. We certainly did not at the time envision universal print as being a security capability. And to be clear, it still has a little bit of work to do. I am just as excited today as I was back at the beginning of the year about the idea of getting rid of print servers and printing directly to our devices. I still think that is absolutely the way to go, but right now it doesn't have the ability to work with or process things like sensitivity labels, or being able to allow a user to print to the device that they're physically closest to based on geo boundaries, right? So there's a lot that can still happen in that space. And actually, that's where I'm really excited about the development work that we think might come in 2022. The big one that obviously we're all dealing with right now, right, is the, do I decide to pronounce this out loud, or do I just say log4j, log4 shell, log4 Apache systems? It's hard to put a Microsoft spin on that. What Microsoft has actually officially said this week is that while no functions of Azure, no components of Azure are themselves directly impacted by this particular challenge, that doesn't mean that you aren't running things that are either tied to or running in or connected to or OAuth authorized to communicate with your Azure Active Directory. We also saw massive improvements in the identity governance space, and I'm really excited about that. We presented a webinar about that just a month or two ago. So the ability to assign roles to external members of your organization, the ability to define separation of duties capabilities. But I still think these are things that are going to be bigger in 2022. So I don't think that they really quite meet the level of having been core security capability offering changes in 2021. So that's it from my list. I'm really curious to know what you think we missed, how you would grade my predictions for what we thought was going to happen over the year versus what really did, and what you think is going to happen in 2022. It's going to be an exciting ride no matter what. I am desperate to get back out on the road, meet people, hear their stories, see what challenges they're facing, and start working toward solving those challenges. And that, yeah, man, I'm excited. Thank you so much for joining me. We did have a little bit of a technical challenge with our live webinar, so I really apologize for anybody who tried to join us on our first go around with that. Thank you. I hope you've had a wonderful year. I hope you stay safe. I hope you stay healthy. And I can't wait to see you in 2022. Thanks so much. Bye.